Having started to build rapport with them by asking about their experiences, you're going to further solidify your rapport by telling them a personal anecdote, a connect story, that will make them feel you agree with them at least about something. It is often hard for allies to do this, but it is vital in building rapport. Connect means you tell an anecdote that is likely to have some level of resonance with at least some part of what they said. Now, not all of what they said something racially problematic, but at least some part of it. This is often the hardest for anti-racist advocates. There are some principles that might lead us to some conclusions about what might work. One principle, one fact, is that there's something called mirror neurons in our heads. You've noticed that people yawn when other people yawn, or if I'm walking and I trip in front of a room, a whole bunch of people go, oops, right? Because it's like they trip, because there's part of our brain that identifies with other people. We almost are natural empathizers to a certain extent. It also is the case that people learn more from stories than from facts, which is why we cry at movies, for example, right? So the reason why it's useful to shift a conversation from opinion to stories is because even just by sharing stories, you're increasing the chance that people will empathize. The person will empathize with you and you with them. Your goal is to tell them an experience that they will find has some degree of resonance with their own point of view. The most common way of doing that is you find something that's aligned with it. You don't believe the whole thing they said, but there's something within it. So for example, they said, people shouldn't complain about the police stuff because everybody knows if you just act right, police treat you fairly. Embedded within that is that the things you do in a cop encounter actually affect the cop. Do y'all believe that's true? Yeah. There's no such thing as white privilege. I'm not privileged. I've worked hard for what I've gotten. Some part of that is hard work matters. You probably can tell stories about how hard work matters. You can probably tell stories about how you have had your own experience, other experience of white people who have had it's hard for them to make it. You can probably tell a story about that. If you tell that story effectively, they're going to be nodding their head, not think of you as the enemy anymore, but as somebody who is another reasonable white person who is not enabling the hordes of slothful brown people, but rather somebody who is reasonable and who understands that the world is complex out there and racism isn't the only thing in the world. I talked about stories that there's one thing embedded in what they said that you agree with, but a whole other way of trying to connect with somebody is I used to think like that. I used to think like that is not, yeah, I thought that stupidly at one point. That's not what that is. You got to show grace to your past self and grace to them. You're trying to turn yourself into not the enemy in this conversation by listening to them first and then telling some story that has some level of alignment with what they believe. Part of what you are trying to leverage is the fact that on some level, you're in a superior intellectual position. Claims of racism are judged often by people who don't see it as like, none of that exists. It's not out there. It's all propaganda. It's all libtard propaganda, right? So, and any claim is a false claim. And part of what happens is that people who think racism is real get caught up in that, never give ground, never admit that racism has lessened or changed in a positive way, never give anything. So you got this kind of weird death grip in the argument, right? The point of this strategy is you can tell a story that will have some resonance because it seems like it's agreeing with some bit that racism against people of color is not it's not the dominant thing in every encounter. You have stories like that. You want to cultivate that story and learn how to tell in 45 seconds or 3 minutes, depending on the need. But you also want to make sure you have your other story that says that race and racism still do matter and that you can break that out too. Your first thing that you share is not the one that says race and racism matter. It's the ones that say sometimes it doesn't matter. I don't think anybody here believes that race and racism dominate every moment of every encounter. We just believe it happens. Race and racism matter a great deal when you think about it more.
Now, also notice the reciprocity principle. Even just by asking, even if they don't ask you, they will feel obligated to listen to your story because you asked them, and because of the reciprocity principle, you asked them and they gave one. And they're not opposed to it because it aligns with them. If you've listened to them and honored them and then agreed with them, they're going to have trouble just saying what you said doesn't count. Because what you just said counts when you agree with them. So for all these statements, there's something embedded within it that you can't believe. Come up with, again, a coherent story, an anecdote that you can tell in 45 seconds or 3 minutes, depending on the situation. You know the core story, you know the setup, the key moment, and the takeaway. So you can talk about it at whatever length is necessary. And deploy that at the right time in the conversation. And again, the connect story you tell for different issues might be different, right? The one for police is one thing, the one for economic problems is a different one, the one for slavery was a long time ago is a different one. But you want to think through, what are my connect stories on different things I want to get ready for?
I think you have to really, when you're listening to that offensive statement, brought forth by, call them a decent human being, you have to look for what's the real nugget. Not the whole thing, not all the objectionable thing. What's the nugget that's in there? Because there might be a nugget that you really could honestly connect with. And if you can't do it honestly, you can't look them in the eye. You have to find something that you can honestly say, okay, that part, yeah. And it's hard to, you might even, that's when you've got to go get that drink. Because it takes a couple minutes. You need a second drink. Because you have to assess what they're saying. I think you have to really try and dig out that honesty so that you can
Right. So my only friendly amendment to that is that there's likely many nuggets, not just one key nugget, that because you're not trying to agree with the heart of their story necessarily. You're trying to agree with something in their story embedded within what they're talking about. So I just want to be clear. It's hard work. I'm just saying it might not be, if you're trying to agree with the core nugget of their story, that might be even more difficult. What you're trying to do is find something that you have some level of alignment with.
Now that you've built a base of rapport by asking them about their experience and telling an experience that will make them feel connected to you, you're in a position to expand their thinking by telling them another anecdote that will help them think differently about race and society.